Welcome to Global Impact. I'm your host, Michael Bosque. Well, what you're hearing right now is New York City traffic during what's called UN Week, when the United Nations General Assembly meets in New York City. And that traffic and gridlock noise you hear actually is not right now. It's from previous years when I've been on location in New York, and the city is totally tied up with traffic. Well, that noise has pretty much failed away in what the New York Post hails as diplomatic immunity from traffic. Why? Because this year, because of COVID-19 and very significant restrictions put on by New York State in terms of quarantine, the first ever virtual UN General Assembly will spare New York City from the usual congestion nightmare from presidential and delegation motorcades, not to mention fully booked hotels and restaurants during this week. And I remember there was even pedestrian gridlock in many parts of Midtown Manhattan while the UN annual parley was going on. And you also had in previous years past the Clinton Global Initiative, which brought even more events and more people and more traffic and more delegations to New York City. So instead, this year, world leaders will be pre-recording their presentations. Speeches from 193 world leaders will be delivered in that format, starting Tuesday with Brazil, followed by the United States and the 191 other countries. And also this year is special because the UN is turning 75. And on Monday, which is today, world leaders lined up to give short speeches on the 75th birthday of the United Nations. So we'll be getting into this program, what's going on at the UN. Why does it matter? Does it matter whatsoever when we're all faced with COVID, with climate change, wildfires, and a host of other problems, not to mention conflicts all over the world? So looking forward to bringing you to New York, and we'll get into it in a moment.
I think that the first people who should read this book are our brothers and sisters in the United States, because their threat is in their own house. The devil is right at home. The devil himself is right in the house. And the devil came here yesterday. Yesterday, the devil came here. Right here. Right here. And it smells of sulfur still today. This table that I am now standing in front of. Yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, from this rostrum, the President of the United States, the gentleman to whom I refer as the devil, came here talking as if he owned the world. Truly, as the owner of the world.
Now, of course, that was the former and late president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, at the 2006 UN General Assembly, when he had very harsh and insulting words for then President Bush, calling him the devil and saying that sulfur was still in the air from his previous presentation. Well, I'll be playing a few more memorable moments from previous UNGAs throughout the program. So as the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly, or the main UN decision-making body, is going digital for the first time, world leaders will deliver their speeches online, and they'll be voting through a new silent voting protocol. But the question also is being raised by what is lost in going digital. Normally, as you may have got the impression from the intro, is more than 100 world leaders descend on New York City to mingle, to negotiate, to problem solve, to undertake diplomacy. And it's got to be said, a lot of them do come to shop and to be seen and to attend concerts as well. But none of that is happening this year. And the question has to be raised with most of the world leaders opting to deliver their addresses by video. what is lost by that? What is lost by all of those kind of mingling opportunities and chance meetings in the hallways of the UN headquarters in Manhattan, or in the hotel lobbies, or different events around New York? So that question was put to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, and he said that he actually regrets that world leaders won't be there in person, that delegations won't be there to conduct diplomacy. So I wanted to play a clip from his answer at a press conference to journalists about this virtual assembly, and whether he thinks something was lost.
But I have to say that diplomacy, to be effective, requires personal contact. And I myself am very sorry that we are not going to have, knowing that there are costs associated, I'm very sorry that we are not going to have the opportunity to bring together leaders of countries. But the truth is that in many situations I have the experience, the personal experience, that problems that had no solution were solved when I had the opportunity to be with both sides and to discuss with them a way forward. This has happened several times, not always, let's be clear, not always, but several times, and I still believe that personal contact is an essential tool in diplomatic efforts.
Now, as many of you know, the UN was established in 1945 mainly as a kind of peace making body, and as a matter of disclosure, I've worked for some UN agencies, primarily UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, as well as on contract with the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization. But definitely during my time as UNICEF, including a short stint in Geneva as global spokesperson, I interacted with many, many UN agencies, primarily the World Food Program, which I have immense respect for the amount of food they distribute around the world, and especially for the talent that they have within their ranks, as well as I said, WHO and also UNHCR, the United Nations Relief Works Organization, and also OCHA, which is basically the coordinating body for emergencies in the UN system. Now, a lot of what UN agencies do, such as UNICEF, is provide what's called technical assistance. So this is basically capacity building, upping their capabilities to provide food and clean water, train others, emergency preparedness, all the stuff that kind of happens between emergencies. And there's been a lot of talk recently, especially in the past week, about how countries in the world are woefully unprepared to have been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, the WHO said earlier this week that the world has wasted billions and billions of dollars by not being prepared to tackle a global pandemic. So one of my favorite quotes about this, about kind of why the UN exists and why humanitarian agencies are so important to boost the kind of resilience of countries, is by a Canadian I really admire, Stephen Lewis. He was Canada's ambassador to the UN, as well as an executive director of UNICEF. And here's what he had to say a few years ago on that.
These countries desperately need help. Not during conflict, of course, not for professional disciplines from outside, but before and after. They struggle to survive. They need people of every discipline. They need what we call broadly in the field of multilateralism technical assistance, which covers the entire panoply of human administrative experience. If such things were available earlier in countries when they are struggling for viability, then the conflict and the breakdowns and the desperate impoverishment which breeds the conflict and the breakdowns might never occur.
Hey there, it's Global Affairs Analyst Michael Bossaque, and just wanted to put a shout out to Anchor. These are the folks that I'm using to make my first podcast. We all like free things, and it is free, and it has creation tools that allow you to add music in and other features into your podcast. And the best thing for me, it distributes it right away to Spotify, Apple Podcast, and a few others. And you can also make money from your podcast. So I highly recommend it, and try downloading it, the free Anchor app, or go to Anchor FM to get started. But so far, so good, and highly recommend it. Now, coming back to the here and now, we return to day one of the week of the UN General Assembly, which, again, Monday was totally devoted to commemorating the 75th anniversary of the world body. And of course, as you'd expect, you heard a lot of compliments towards the UN, really a lot of statements supporting a rules-based international world order, people saying that multilateralism rather is a must. There were also reminders that the UN is very badly in need of reform. The audience was reminded of growing inequality and also of conflicts. Now, this whole week is often referred to as the Super Bowl of diplomacy, a kind of meeting of minds and of grandstanding. And although Tuesday will likely be the best day to watch grandstanding, there was some hint of it today, actually, when the foreign minister of Pakistan, who is Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, reminded everybody of some of the shortfallings of the United Nations. And I wanted to play that clip. Just he covered a lot of ground here on what seems to be lacking in the world body.
Today, the UN is derided as a talk shop. Its resolutions and decisions are flouted. International cooperation, especially in the Security Council, is at its lowest. Force is threatened with abandon. Critical treaties and covenants designed to promote development and protect the globe's fragile environment are discarded. The very forces that led to the Second World War, racism and fascism, are taking the shape of rising xenophobia and Islamophobia. While we have seen enormous international cooperation to combat COVID-19, it has failed to unify humanity as it could have. I perhaps am not alone in having a foreboding sense of déjà vu.
Well, it needs to be said that those who have worked for the UN have regarded the UN flag or the UN logo, that iconic logo, as a kind of shield, a protection against anything evil that might come their way. And of course, whether you're a peacekeeper or a UN humanitarian aid worker, you do understand going to work for the organization, you put yourself in the line of danger. However, that ability or power of the logo or the flag to protect its workers has become severely diminished. And I refer, for example, to the August 2003 attack on the UN headquarters in Baghdad, which killed at least 22 people, including the United Nations Special Representative Sergio Vieira de Mello, who, by the way, was in line possibly to become a UN Secretary General. And then in August 2011, in Abuja, Nigeria, a building where I used to work in for UNICEF, well, the UN headquarters there was attacked by a car bomber, and at least 21 were killed and many, many injured. And I happened to have walked out of that building for the last time just a few short weeks before that attack happened. So 8 years after the high-profile Iraq bombing of the UN headquarters, what were the lessons learned when another UN headquarters in Nigeria was also bombed, leading to a tragic loss of life? In her book, Samantha Power describes the whole series of security lapses that occurred in the run-up to the 2003 bombing of the UN headquarters in Iraq, and also the very, very slow process to hold people accountable, especially senior members of the UN security staff in New York, in what was thought to have been a preventable attack. A lot of the warning signals were there, but they weren't heeded. So I do hope, and I'm sure many others share this feeling, that as part of the UN reform process, a huge amount of time and effort will be devoted to protecting the safety of UN staff and consultants, because too many have died in what many consider have been preventable attacks. Now, to kind of finish off this segment on the United Nations General Assembly, I wanted to briefly go over the first half of day 2, which is Tuesday. And the first country, as traditionally is done, to give a pre-recorded speech was Brazil, and its President Bolsonaro, who, by the way, is recovering from the coronavirus after belittling it or mocking it for several weeks and months. And Brazil now has one of the highest case loads in the world. That was followed by the USA, which we'll get to in a moment, and the other heavyweights, Turkey, Iran, China, the Russian Federation, and France. The address by French President Emmanuel Macron stood out for a couple of reasons. One was for its kind of eloquence and the breadth of topics that he covered, but also he did blast far over the 15-minute time limit set for every speech. By my own calculation, he clocked in at almost 50 minutes. And so did the president of Turkey, President Erdogan. As can be expected, the topics at the top of mind in all of the speeches was COVID-19 and how to deal with the global economic crisis, the peace in the Middle East, the need to preserve multilateralism, and a rules-based international world order, nuclear proliferation, big emphasis on climate change, and also on refugees and migrants. But it was really President Trump's speech that stood out, as can be expected. He gave what was basically a campaign speech for a domestic audience. This could very well be his last time at that very esteemed podium. And first part of the speech, which I'm going to play for you in a second, is a defense of his handling of the coronavirus. Should be noted that just about now, the United States is approaching the grim milestone of 200,000 deaths. And experts project that by later in the fall, that could easily increase by 100,000 or more. So a very somber day for the United States. And as can be expected, the president also spent some time attacking China for, as they say, unleashing the China virus, and also attacked the WHO for basically being influenced or controlled by China. Should be noted also that in past years, Trump has withdrawn the United States from a number of UN organizations, the UN Relief Works Agency, withdrawn the US from the UN Human Rights Council, and has threatened to pull the United States out of the WHO. And as I wrote a few months ago in my op-ed for CNN Opinion, he appointed what many regard as a third-rate diplomat to replace Nikki Haley as UN ambassador. So it wasn't surprising, perhaps, that we got the kind of speech that we did today, but here's a quick clip from that.
We have waged a fierce battle against the invisible enemy, the China virus, which has claimed countless lives in 188 countries. In the United States, we launched the most aggressive mobilization since the Second World War. We rapidly produced a record supply of ventilators, creating a surplus that allowed us to share them with friends and partners all around the globe. We pioneered life-saving treatments, reducing our fatality rate 85% since April. Thanks to our efforts, 3 vaccines are in the final stage of clinical trials. We are mass producing them in advance so they can be delivered immediately upon arrival. We will distribute a vaccine. We will defeat the virus. We will end the pandemic. And we will enter a new era of unprecedented prosperity, cooperation, and peace.
Again, that was U.S. President Donald Trump speaking at day 2 of the UN General Assembly in a pre-recorded speech. I should note that taking into account all the other speeches on Tuesday morning, President Trump really found himself alone in the so-called diplomatic sandbox, really on the attack, really on a kind of bully mood attacking China. And as I said, a campaign-like speech in which he boasted about his own accomplishments. So trademark me, but that's what we've come to expect from the U.S. President. I should also note that the Russian President Vladimir Putin gave quite a lengthy speech as well. And in it, he promised to provide free vaccines, his Sputnik V vaccine produced in Russia, to all UN staff members. Highly doubtful they'll take it up, especially since it hasn't been recognized as safe, at least not yet, by the World Health Organization. And he also said that other countries are, welcome to take up the vaccine too. And finally, a very interesting a couple of points he made was that he proposed so-called green corridors, free of conflict and free of sanctions, to move things like food and medicine and protective gear for health workers from one place to another. One last thing President Putin proposed was a meeting of the G5, in other words, a meeting of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, which is an interesting proposition because there is the G7. It used to be G8 until Russia was booted out after it illegally annexed Crimea from Ukraine. But he wants a meeting of a so-called G5 as soon as the so-called epidemiological situation permits. And finally, speaking of Russia, in his very long speech, French President Emmanuel Macron raised the issue of the use of Novichok, the chemical nerve agent, against Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. He slammed Russia for using it. And in a very memorable quote, I think, he said, "We will enforce our red lines." So we haven't heard the end of Europe's possible response to the use of this chemical nerve agent against a opposition leader in Russia. Remains to be seen what other actions France and other European allies will take on that particular issue against Russia.
The very right to be human is denied every day to hundreds of millions of people as a result of poverty and the unavailability of basic necessities such as food, jobs, water and shelter, education, health care, and a healthy environment. As I sit in Kuno, my village, and grow as ancient as its hills, I will continue to entertain the hope that there has emerged a cadre of leaders in my own country and region, on my continent, and in the world, which will not allow that any should be denied their freedom, as we were, that any should be turned into refugees, as we were, that any should be condemned to go hungry, as we were, that any should be stripped of their human dignity, as we were.
Of all of the challenges we debate and discuss, rising sea levels present the single biggest threat to our region. For those who live in the South Pacific, the impacts of climate change are not academic or even arguable. They are watching the sea levels rise, the extreme weather events increase, and the impact on their water supply and food crops. Now, we can talk all we like about the science and what it means, what temperature rises we need to limit in order to survive, but there is a grinding reality. And hearing someone from a Pacific island talk about where the sea was when they were a child and the potential loss of their entire village as an adult. Our action in the wake of this global challenge remains optional, but the impact of inaction does not. Nations like Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, or Kiribati, small countries who have contributed the least to global climate change are and will suffer the full force of a warming planet. If my Pacific neighbours do not have the option of opting out of the effects of climate change, why should we be able to opt out of taking action to stop it?
Sadly, once again, the biggest challenge comes from Africa, from Darfur, where the continued spectacle of men and women and children driven from their homes by murder, rape, and burning of their villages makes a mockery of our claim as an international community to shield people from the worst abuses. I depart convinced that today's United Nations does more than ever before. It does it better than ever before. Yet, our work is far from complete. Indeed, it will never be.
As promised, some memorable clips from previous United Nations General Assemblies. The first audio, of course, is a very recognizable, respected voice from 1998, the speech by former South African anti-apartheid and political leader and the former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. That was followed by New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in 2018, and a couple of clips from former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan. A very quick reminder that you can read my two recent pieces on CNN Opinion. Just go to cnn.com/opinions, and there you'll find two pieces. One is how Canada managed to flatten the COVID-19 curve, and the U.S. didn't. And also another piece on who's standing up to Russia on the Navalny poisoning. And I said, certainly not America. So again, cnn.com/opinion. Stay with me. I will be right back. So it's been 243 days since the first case of COVID-19 was reported in the United States. That sound you just heard was the bell toll at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., which is ringing 200 times to mark the 200,000 people in the U.S. who have died as a result of COVID-19. This tragic milestone is being marked as the world approaches 1 million deaths and more than 31 million cases. But the U.S. COVID-19 death toll now tops the battle deaths from 5 wars combined, and researchers project almost 180,000 additional COVID-19 deaths by January 1st. Now, the daily caseload has gone down from a peak of more than 70,000 to a little more than 52,000 today. However, the number of daily deaths in the U.S. due to COVID-19 is around 356, and that means still the United States has by far the highest number of daily deaths. And finally, zooming out and looking at the global picture, the number of new cases are rising, and quite significantly in India, Spain, France, and Brazil. And in the United Kingdom, where new restrictions, possibly more lockdowns even, are coming into effect this week, the United Kingdom could see 50,000 new coronavirus cases a day by mid-October without further action. And that's according to the government's chief scientific advisor. And on Sunday, there were almost 4,000 new daily cases reported in the United Kingdom. Well, this brings us to the end of yet another episode of Global Impact. And remember, there are several ways you can help support this podcast, and among them is clicking subscribe on one of the podcast platforms that you use. Don't forget to give us a like if you can. And of course, you always have the option of supporting the program financially by going to the podcast website page, because after all, at the end of the day, this is a listener-supported podcast. As I always do, I like to remind everyone different parts of the world are going back into lockdown. There are parts, many countries where people are going to be stuck back at home again. Please do not forget about them. Reach out to them and remind them that somebody's thinking about them. Thank you for listening to this edition of Global Impact. I'm your host, Michael Bosicue. Please do tune in next week, where I'm very, very pleased to announce that we will have a very special guest, and that is Peter Maurer, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC. He'll be speaking to us from their headquarters in Switzerland. I will be more than happy to present some of the questions you may have for Mr. Maurer. So please send them to me via the Facebook page, my own Facebook page, on Twitter, or on the Anchor FM homepage for this podcast. You can also even leave a voice message. Easy way to get that to us, and we may even play it on the podcast. So please go ahead and send your questions for really one of the leaders of the humanitarian community in the world. And finally, I know I've perhaps tested some people's patience with these long clips from the UN General Assembly, and let's admit it, the news on COVID-19 has been pretty somber, and of course we hope that things will improve quickly. So on that note, I'd like to leave you with a very upbeat piece by a band many of you have heard before, called Clestore from Quebec in Canada. And they're playing a song here called Andy's Ride. And believe me, on this one, you want to turn up the volume. If you have a partner nearby, grab them and get ready to dance, because this will really get your blood flowing. Again, thanks for joining. And until we meet again.